Steve's voice ripped through the night, loud enough to make strangers stop and stare. David froze mid-step. His hands were raised slightly, palms open, not begging, not threatening, just still. His clothes were worn thin from years on the street, his beard untrimmed. To Steve, he looked like trouble, like risk, like someone who didn't belong anywhere near a car worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. A small crowd gathered. Phones came out. Whispers spread. "You think I don't know your type?" Steve snapped, standing between David and the car like a guard dog protecting gold. "Back away." Now, what no one there knew, what Steve didn't want anyone to know, was that minutes earlier, he had been inside that same car with his forehead pressed against the steering wheel, shoulders shaking, breath breaking apart. A billionaire, crying. No assistants answered. No friends picked up. No one came, except David. The man everyone else walked past had heard everything. "I can fix it," David said quietly. The laughter came instantly sharp, uncomfortable. "Fix what? The car? The breakdown? The life that looked perfect but felt hollow?" Steve scoffed. "I'm asking Fia." What he didn't realize, what the crowd couldn't imagine, was that David had once lived the life Steve was clinging to. And in the next hour, everything Steve believed about success, power, and worth was about to collapse. Ultra-realistic cinematic photograph in daylight on an industrial city street. David wasn't always invisible. There was a time when his name carried weight in boardrooms, when engineers half his age would lean in to hear him speak, when the problems everyone else abandoned would land on his desk with a note attached. "If David can't fix it, it can't be fixed." He'd built his reputation one impossible solution at a time. Mechanical systems that shouldn't work but did. Software integrations that defied logic until he made them make sense. He was the kind of man who saw patterns where others saw chaos, who could hold an entire blueprint in his mind and spot the single flaw that would bring it all down. His father had taught him that competence is currency. Master your craft, and the world will make room for you. David believed it completely, until the day it stopped being true. The accusation came from nowhere. A project failure, missing funds. Someone needed to take the blame. And David, brilliant, proud, black, and unwilling to play politics, made an easy target. The investigation cleared him eventually. But by then the damage was done. Whispers travel faster than truth. His name became associated with risk, with liability, with trouble. The calls stopped coming. Companies that had begged for his expertise suddenly had filled positions. Interviews that seemed promising ended with polite rejections. His savings drained slowly at first, then all at once. Rent, utilities, food. The math stopped working. Pride kept him silent. He'd spent 43 years proving his worth through work, not words. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. So he didn't ask. He just kept trying, kept applying, kept believing that competence would eventually win. It didn't. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. By Friday, he was sleeping in his car. By the following month, the car was gone two-toed, impounded, auctioned off for fees he couldn't pay. The shelter had rules, curfews, indignities that ground him down night after night. Eventually, the street seemed simpler, cleaner, in its own terrible way. People stopped seeing him almost immediately. Not because he'd changed, he was still the same man, still sharp, still capable of holding complex problems in his mind and finding solutions. But the context had shifted. The clothes were wrong. The smell was wrong. The location was wrong. And in a city that moved fast, anything out of place became invisible. David learned to navigate that invisibility. Learned which corners offered shade in summer and shelter in winter. Learned which restaurants threw out food still wrapped. Which security guards would look away. Which strangers might spare change without making him perform gratitude. He also learned to listen. People said things around invisible men. Secrets spilled into phones. Frustrations vented to companions. Weaknesses exposed when they thought no one important was watching. David absorbed it all, not from malice, but from habit. His mind still solved problems, even when no one was paying him to anymore. That's what he was doing the night everything changed. Listening. Steve had built his empire on a simple principle. Control everything. Trust nothing. It made him rich. Ruthlessly, efficiently rich. The kind of wealth that opened doors before you reached them, that turned no into yes. With a single phone call, he'd started with nothing less than nothing, really, drowning in student debt, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Manhattan. But he had vision, and hunger, and a willingness to do whatever it took. 20 years later, he owned buildings, companies, a portfolio that made financial analysts salivate. His face appeared in magazines next to words like disruptor and visionary. People wanted to be him, or be near him, or at minimum, avoid being destroyed by him. But success at that level requires sacrifice. Friendships become transactions. Family becomes obligation. Every conversation carries calculation: who wants what, who can deliver, who's about to become deadweight. Steve had pruned relationships with the same cold efficiency he applied to business. Anyone who couldn't keep up got left behind. It made sense. It was practical. It was necessary. Until the night it wasn't. The deal should have been simple. A merger that would cement his position, silence his critics, prove once and for all that he'd transcended his origins. But it was unraveling. Regulations he hadn't anticipated, partners getting cold feet, board members questioning his judgment. For the first time in years, Steve felt the ground shifting beneath him. He'd tried everything. Pressure, incentives, threats. Nothing worked. And worse, far worse, he had no one to call. No friend to talk through options. No partner to share the weight. Just assistants who worked for paychecks and associates who smelled blood in the water. The panic hit him in the car. He'd stayed late at the office, chasing solutions that didn't exist. Then climbed behind the wheel of his $300,000 vehicle and just stopped, forehead against the steering wheel. Breath coming too fast. Chest tight, the kind of fear that has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the realization that you've built a life with no foundation, no backup, no one who gives a damn if you collapse. And someone heard. From the curb, David recognized the sound immediately. Not the car, not the engine, the breathing, the particular rhythm of a man coming apart. He'd made that sound himself once. In a different car, on a different street. When the world first stopped making sense, David stood slowly, bones protesting, and moved toward the vehicle. That's when Steve looked up and saw him. That's when everything accelerated. "Get your filthy hands off my car before you stain it." The crowd formed like metal shavings around a magnet drawn by conflict, held by cruelty. Steve's voice had that effect. Loud enough to shatter the urban white noise of traffic and distant sirens. Sharp enough to cut through the bubble every city dweller wraps around themselves for protection. People stopped mid-stride. Heads turned. Phones rose. David stood perfectly still, hands visible, non-threatening. He'd learned that stillness years ago. Sudden movements, got you hurt. Sudden movements got police called. Sudden movements confirmed every assumption people had already made about men who looked like him, lived like him, existed like him. I said back away. Steve's hand shot out, finger pointing like a weapon. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I heard you crying. David's voice was quiet, steady, the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. I thought maybe you needed help. The word crying landed like a slap. Steve's face flushed, his jaw clenched. Around them, the crowd leaned in not physically, but energetically. This was getting good. This was content. A billionaire and a homeless man. The phone cameras multiplied. I wasn't. Steve caught himself, awareness of the audience registering too late. You're confused. You're mistaken. Just go back to wherever you came from. The curb, David said simply. I came from the curb. About 15 feet that way. Someone in the crowd laughed a short, uncomfortable bark that died quickly. Steve's eyes darted to the phones, to the faces, to the growing realization that this moment was being recorded, cataloged, weaponized. His PR team would see this. His board would see this. Everyone would see this. A billionaire screaming at a homeless man on a downtown street at 11 p.m. The optics were a nightmare, but the alternative, admitting vulnerability, admitting the breakdown, admitting that David was right, felt worse. Look, Steve said, forcing his voice lower, trying to manufacture reasonableness. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Everything's fine. I don't need anything from you. David tilted his head slightly, his eyes clear, sharp, unimpressed, held Steve's gaze without challenge, without submission, just observation. You're not fine, David said. Your breathing's still wrong. Hands shaking. You're holding your chest like it hurts. That's a panic attack, not a heart attack. In case you were wondering. But you already knew that. This isn't your first one. The silence that followed was absolute. Steve felt his face go hot, then cold. How could this man, this stranger, this nobody see through him so completely? How could someone society had discarded possess that kind of clarity? You don't know anything about me, Steve managed. But his voice had lost its edge. I know you're alone, David replied. I know you've been sitting in this car for 40 minutes trying to decide who to call. And you haven't called anyone. I know that scares you more than whatever business problem brought you out here this late. A woman in the crowd whispered to her companion. The sound carried, oh my God, he's right. Steve's hands curled into fists. The vulnerability was unbearable. The exposure was unbearable. The fact that this man dressed in clothes Steve wouldn't use as rags could read him like a balance sheet, made him want to scream or run or both. Instead, he attacked. What gives you the right? Steve's voice climbed again, hysteria creeping in at the edges. You live on the street. You smell like garbage. You've clearly made every wrong choice a person can make. And you think you can just walk up to me to ME and tell me what I'm feeling? David didn't flinch, didn't argue, just waited. You want to help? Steve continued, cruelty replacing fear because cruelty was easier. Here. He reached for his wallet, pulled out $100 bill, and threw it. The bill fluttered, caught air, landed on the sidewalk between them. Take it. Buy whatever you people buy. Then disappear. The crowd's energy shifted. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others filmed more intently. sensing viral potential. A young man muttered, "That's messed up," to no one in particular. David looked at the money, looked at Steve, didn't move. "I don't want your money," he said quietly. "Everyone wants my money," Steve shouted, the words ripping out of him. "That's all anyone wants. That's all anyone has ever wanted. So take it and go. I want to help you fix your problem. I don't have a problem." The confession echoed off concrete and glass. Steve heard it a half second after he said it, the desperation, the lie, the breaking point exposed for everyone with a phone to capture. David reached down slowly, picked up the $100 bill, and held it out to Steve. "You drop this." Steve stared at the money, at the hand offering it back, at the man who should have taken it gratefully, because that's how this was supposed to work. The world had rules, hierarchies. People in David's position didn't refuse gifts from people in Steve's position. "What do you want?" Steve's voice had gone hoarse. "Really? What is this?" "I told you," David said. "I can fix it." "Fix what?" The question came out broken. "Whatever broke you?" The crowd had grown to 20 people now, maybe more. This had gone beyond spectacle into something raw. People sensed they were witnessing something real. Not a performance, not content, but an actual human moment happening in public, where human moments weren't supposed to exist. Steve looked at David, really looked at him for the first time, past the beard, past the worn clothes, past all the signals that said, ignore, avoid, dismiss. And what he saw in David's eyes wasn't pity, wasn't judgment, wasn't the hungry calculation he'd learned to expect from everyone. It was recognition, the look of someone who'd been where Steve was standing, who'd felt what Steve was feeling, who'd survived it. "I can't." Steve started, then stopped. His throat closed. His eyes burned. Not here. Not in front of cameras. Not in front of witnesses who'd turn this into entertainment or outrage or both. "Yes, you can," David said gently. "But not like this. Not alone. Not anymore." Steve's legs felt weak. The adrenaline was draining, leaving exhaustion in its wake. He wanted to get in his car and drive away. He wanted to rewind to before any of this happened. He wanted to understand how his life had become so perfectly calibrated for success and so completely empty of meaning. How? The word came out as a whisper. David stepped closer, slowly, carefully, giving Steve space to retreat if he needed it. "First," David said, "you stop pretending. Then you listen. Then we figure it out together." Steve laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Together. With you. A homeless man." "With me," David confirmed, without shame. "A man who's already lost everything you're afraid of losing, which makes me the only person here qualified to help." The logic was absurd, completely backwards, utterly insane. And somehow standing there on a downtown street with strangers filming and his empire cracking and his chest still tight with panic, it was the first thing that had made sense to Steve in months. The 3 words hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. "I can fix it." The laughter started small, a snicker from someone in the back of the crowd. Then it spread, rippling outward, gaining confidence. Not malicious exactly, but disbelieving. The kind of laughter that greets impossible claims. A flat earther at a NASA convention. A child promising to build a rocket from cardboard. A homeless man offering to solve a billionaire's problems. Steve felt the laughter like salt in a wound. His humiliation had an audience now. Witnesses who'd reduce this moment to a story they'd tell at dinner parties. You won't believe what I saw downtown. His jaw tightened. His pride, battered but not dead, reasserted itself. Fix it, Steve repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. You can fix it. Yes. You don't even know what it is. Yes, I do. David's certainty was maddening. The deal that's falling apart. The merger you've spent 8 months building. The partners getting cold feet because they don't trust your judgment anymore. The board members asking questions you can't answer. The feeling that one wrong move will prove everyone right, whoever said you got lucky instead of being good. Steve's blood went cold. How do you... He stopped, looked around, lowered his voice. How do you know about the merger? That's confidential. That's... You talked about it. David gestured vaguely toward the car. On the phone 40 minutes ago, before you started crying. You were parked right there, windows down because the AC is acting up. I was sitting right here. He pointed to the curb. Sound travels. Steve's mind raced backward, reconstructing the timeline. The phone call with his attorney. The conference call with the financial team. The increasingly desperate messages to contacts who weren't responding. He'd thought he was alone. Private. Safe in the cocoon of his expensive car on a public street. He'd forgotten that privacy is a luxury only the visible can afford. You were listening to my calls? Steve's anger flickered back to life, grasping for solid ground. That's inevitable, David interrupted. You were loud, upset. And I was here. Where else was I supposed to go? This is my corner. Has been for 8 months. A young woman in the crowd, mid-20s. Expensive jacket, the kind of person who probably worked in tech, spoke up. Wait. So he actually knows what's going on? Like, specifically? David didn't break eye contact with Steve. The Aurora Systems merger. Valuation's good on paper, but there's regulatory concerns about monopolistic practices. 2 of your key partners, the ones who were supposed to provide political cover, backed out after that article in the Journal last week. The one about your labor practices. Now you're exposed. The timeline's compressing, and you can't show weakness, or the whole thing collapses. The silence was different now. Heavier. More dangerous. Steve felt exposed in a new way. Not emotionally, but strategically. This man knew details that could tank stock prices. Details that rivals would pay for. Details that, in the wrong hands, could destroy everything Steve had spent 2 decades building. You could blackmail me, Steve said quietly. This information. You could sell it. Use it. I could. David agreed. But I won't. Why not? David's expression shifted, something sad moving behind his eyes. Because I used to be you. Not the money part, but the fear part. The part where you realize competence isn't enough. Where you learn that the system you trusted to catch you doesn't catch everyone. And when I needed help, people walked past me like I was furniture. Like I was already dead. He paused, then added with devastating simplicity, I won't be them. Steve felt something crack inside his chest. Not panic this time. Something deeper. The foundation of assumptions he'd built his worldview on, that success meant you were valuable. That failure meant you weren't. That people like him and people like David existed in separate universes with separate rules. Even if you know how it works, Steve said, voice barely stable. Even if you understand the details, what could you possibly do? You don't have resources, connections, access. You can't just, I can think, David said. I can see patterns. I can solve problems. That's what I did before everything fell apart. That's what I still do, even though nobody's paying me for it anymore. He stepped closer, voice intensifying. You're drowning in information, but you've got no clarity. Everyone around you has an agenda. Everyone wants something. You can't trust anyone's advice because you can't see their angle. And I can trust you? I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something. I want to fix a problem, David said firmly. That's what I do. That's who I am. It's the only thing they couldn't take from me when they took everything else. Steve studied him, this impossible man with his impossible offer. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was insane. You don't take business advice from homeless people. You don't invite strangers into your strategic planning. You don't trust someone with nothing to lose with information that could cost you everything. But the rational part of his brain had been steering for 20 years. And where had it gotten him? Alone, in a car, at 11 p.m., having a panic attack, with no one to call. What's your angle? Steve asked. Really? What do you get out of this? David considered the question seriously. Maybe I get to feel useful again. Maybe I get to prove that I didn't deserve what happened to me. Maybe I'm just tired of being invisible, and this is the only way I know how to be seen. The honesty was disarming. No sales pitch, no manipulation, just raw human need, stated plainly. Or maybe, David continued, I'm just good at solving things. And you've got something that needs solving. And for once in the last 2 years, those two facts can line up. A man in the crowd, older, wearing a suit that suggested lawyer or banker, called out, This is crazy. You're actually considering this. Steve didn't look away from David. What would you need? Access to the real data. The stuff your team is filtering before it gets to you. 30 minutes to read through the actual contracts, not the summaries. And you'd need to answer my questions honestly, even when the answers make you look bad. That's it? That's it. No payment? No equity? No. I need you to listen, David said. Actually listen. Not pretend to listen while you're already deciding I'm wrong. Not humor me because you feel guilty. Listen. Can you do that? The question landed like an accusation. When was the last time Steve had actually listened to someone? Really listened, without calculating, without defending, without planning his response. He couldn't remember. And if I say yes? Steve asked. If I actually let you what? Consult? Advise? If I let you into my business based on a conversation on a street corner? What happens when you're wrong? When this blows up in my face? David smiled small, sad, knowing. Then you'll be exactly where you are right now. Alone, scared, out of options. Except you'll have tried something different instead of doing the same thing and expecting different results. Someone in the crowd started clapping slow, sarcastic. Others joined in. The moment was becoming theater again. Entertainment for people who'd tell this story for years. Steve ignored them. His entire focus had narrowed to David, to this impossible decision, to the gap between the life he'd built and the help he needed. I have a car, Steve said finally. It's parked in a garage 3 blocks from here. Private. No cameras. We can talk there. David nodded slowly. Okay. But first, Steve reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone. First, you tell me something only someone who actually understands the problem would know. Prove you're not just lucky. prove you actually see something I'm missing." David didn't hesitate. "Your biggest problem isn't the partners who left. It's the one who stayed. Marcus Chen. He's positioned himself as your only option, which means he's about to renegotiate terms. He'll wait until you're desperate, probably 48 hours from now, then demand double his equity stake. And you'll give it to him because you'll think you have no choice." Steve's face went white. "How do you—" "I heard you talking to your CFO. She said Chen was being surprisingly supportive. Nobody's surprisingly supportive in a deal this big unless they're setting up leverage. The assessment was surgical. Precise. Exactly the kind of thinking Steve paid consultants 6 figures to provide. From a man sleeping on a curb. "Okay," Steve said, voice hollow. "Okay, let's go." The parking garage was concrete and fluorescent light. Empty, except for a handful of luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. Steve's footsteps echoed sharp and purposeful. David's were quieter. The soft shuffle of worn shoes that had walked too many miles. Steve led them to a different car, not the one from the street. This was a Mercedes SUV, black, pristine, anonymous. He unlocked it with a key fob that chirped twice in the cavernous space. "Get in," Steve said, then caught himself. "Please." David hesitated at the passenger door, looking down at his clothes. Dirt-stained jeans. A jacket that had been through too many seasons. He smelled like the street sweat and exhaust and survival. "I'll mess up your interior," David said. "I don't care." Steve was already climbing into the driver's seat. "Get in." David opened the door carefully, lowered himself into leather that probably cost more than his last month's rent before he lost everything. The seat adjusted automatically, sensors responding to weight and position. Climate control activated. The dashboard glowed with technology. Steve didn't start the engine. Just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "Talk," Steve said. "Tell me what you see that I don't." David was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, lost the careful deference of the street, gained the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "The merger isn't failing because of regulatory concerns," David said. "That's the excuse. The real problem is that Aurora Systems knows something about your company that you don't know, they know." Steve's head snapped toward him. "What?" "Your supply chain. Specifically, the rare earth minerals sourcing for your server farms. You've been using a vendor that's connected to conflict zones, not directly, but 3 suppliers deep. Far enough to give you plausible deniability. Close enough that a determined investigator could draw lines. That's not..." Steve stopped. His face was unreadable. "How would you know that?" "Because 6 weeks ago, you had a conference call with your head of operations. You were parked in the same spot, same time of night. He told you about concerns with the vendor, but recommended staying the course because switching would cost millions and delay timelines. You agreed. You said, and I quote, 'If nobody's asking questions, we don't volunteer answers.'" Steve's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You've been listening to my calls for 6 weeks? You've been parking there for 6 weeks. Having the same conversations. I've been sitting on the same curb for 8 months. David's tone wasn't defensive, just factual. You had maybe 15 different calls about supply chain issues. Most of them, you shut down anyone who suggested making changes. You kept saying the same thing. We can't show weakness right now. That's not, Steve's voice cracked. That's business. That's smart strategy. It's a time bomb, David said quietly. And Aurora Systems found it. That's why your partners backed out. Not because of the journal article about labor practices that was just convenient cover. They got tipped off about the supply chain. Someone did their homework. Now they're gone. And you're exposed. And Chen knows it. That's why he's staying. He's waiting for you to get desperate enough to give him whatever he wants. The silence in the car was suffocating. Steve's mind raced through implications, timelines, conversations. The pieces fit. They fit too well. His head of operations had been unusually quiet lately. His CFO had mentioned Aurora Systems doing deeper than expected due diligence. The partners who left had done so abruptly, without explanation, despite months of positive signals. If that's true, Steve said slowly, if they actually found that connection, I'm finished. The regulatory scrutiny alone would tank the stock price. The PR disaster would destroy partnerships. Everything I've built falls apart, David finished. Unless you get ahead of it. How? By admitting it? That's corporate suicide. By fixing it first, then disclosing it on your terms. David shifted in his seat, turning to face Steve fully. You announce a comprehensive audit of your entire supply chain. Partner with an independent ethics organization, someone credible. Someone nobody can accuse of being bought. Find every problem, document it, and present a complete remediation plan. Not because you got caught, because you're committed to doing it right. Steve laughed bitter, exhausted. That's PR suicide. That's admitting guilt. No, that's leadership. David's voice intensified. Right now, you look like every other billionaire who cuts corners and hopes nobody notices. But if you're the one who exposes the problem, if you're the one who takes the financial hit to fix it, that's a different story. That changes the narrative from caught to corrected. It would cost millions. The delays alone would be cheaper than a federal investigation. Cheaper than criminal charges if they find evidence of knowing negligence. Cheaper than losing Aurora Systems and having to rebuild your reputation from scratch. Steve's head throbbed. The logic was sound, frustratingly sound, but everything in him rebelled against it. You didn't volunteer problems. You didn't invite scrutiny. You managed perception, controlled information, stayed 3 steps ahead of disaster. Except he wasn't 3 steps ahead. He was drowning. Who are you? Steve asked suddenly. Really? You're not just some guy who ended up homeless. Nobody thinks like this by accident. David looked away, out the passenger window at concrete pillars and expensive cars. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. If I'm going to trust you, if I'm going to blow up my strategy based on advice from someone I met an hour ago, I need to know who you are. The silence stretched. David's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. My name is David Chen, he said finally. Steve went very still. Chen. Like Marcus Chen? My brother. The confession landed like a physical blow. Steve's mind spun, recalculating everything. Marcus Chen, his last remaining partner. The man positioning to renegotiate terms. The only person still in the deal had a brother named David. A brother who was homeless. Your brother is Marcus Chen. Steve repeated slowly. And you're living on the street. Yes. Does he know? Does Marcus know He knows where I am. He chose to leave me here. The words were flat, empty of emotion, which somehow made them worse. Steve's thoughts raced. Marcus had never mentioned a brother. Never mentioned family at all, actually. He'd cultivated an image of the self-made immigrant success story came to America with nothing. Built an empire through brilliance and determination. There were profiles in magazines, a TED Talk, a carefully constructed narrative, with a brother sleeping on a curb 3 blocks from his office. "What happened?" Steve asked. David's laugh was sharp. "You want the long version? Or the short version? The true version?" David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly in his lap. "I was the smart one. Everyone said so. Marcus was the hustler, the charismatic one. But I was the one who could actually build things. We started a company together 10 years ago. Software automation for supply chain management. Ironic, right?" He smiled without humor. "I designed the core systems. Marcus handled business development. It was supposed to be 50-50. Partners. Brothers. What went wrong? We got an offer. A big one. Company wanted to acquire us. Marcus wanted to take it. I didn't. I thought we could build something bigger. Something that mattered. We fought about it for months." David's voice went hollow. "Then the patents got reassigned. The intellectual property I developed suddenly. It was solely in Marcus's name. Paperwork I'd never seen. Signatures that looked like mine but weren't." Steve felt ice in his stomach. "He forged documents. He said I'd signed them when I was drunk. Said I didn't remember. Brought in lawyers who testified I'd been acting erratically, missing meetings, making threats. He built a case that I was mentally unstable, that I was sabotaging the company, that I was a liability. And the company sold it 3 months later, for 8 times what the original offer had been. Marcus walked away with everything. I walked away with a reputation as an unstable partner who couldn't be trusted. No company would touch me. No investor would take my calls." David's voice cracked slightly. "And when I tried to fight it, when I got lawyers involved, Marcus had better lawyers, richer lawyers, the kind who can make problems disappear." Steve felt sick. He knew Marcus Chen as calculating, brilliant, aggressive. But this stealing from his own brother, destroying him systematically, this was something else. "Why are you helping me?" Steve asked. "If Marcus is my partner, if I'm in business with the man who did that to you, why would you help me?" David met his eyes. "Because you're about to make the same mistake I did." "What mistake?" "Trusting him." Steve sat frozen, David's words echoing in the enclosed space of the SUV. "You think Marcus is setting me up?" Steve said. It wasn't a question. "I know he is." David's voice carried absolute certainty. "It's what he does. He finds people who are winning, positions himself as their ally, waits until they're vulnerable, then takes everything. He did it to me. He's done it to at least 3 other partners I know about. You're just the biggest score yet." Steve's mind rejected it even as part of him recognized the truth. Marcus had appeared exactly when Steve needed him most after the Aurora deal started falling apart. When other partners were getting skittish, he'd been supportive, reassuring, unfailingly helpful. Always available. Always agreeing. Always positioning. "The supply chain problem," Steve said slowly. "Marcus knew about it. He had to. He's got people on my operations team, consultants he recommended I hire 6 months ago. And he's the one who tipped off Aurora Systems." David's tone was matter of fact, like he was explaining basic math. Not directly. Too careful for that. but through intermediaries. He made sure they found exactly enough to scare them off, but not enough to completely kill the deal. Just enough to make you desperate. Why? If the deal dies, he loses too. He doesn't want the deal to die. He wants you to need him so badly that you'll give him anything. Then once he owns enough of your company, he'll fix the problem, probably already has the solution lined up, and he'll look like the hero who saved everything. Meanwhile, you've just handed him control. The elegant brutality of it made Steve's stomach turn. It was exactly the kind of move he might have made himself once. The kind of ruthless strategy he'd admired in others. Except now he was the mark. I have lawyers, Steve said. Contracts. Protections. So did I. David's voice was soft. Marcus is better at this than you are. He's been planning it longer. And right now, you're emotional, exhausted, and running out of time. That's exactly where he wants you. Steve wanted to argue, wanted to defend his judgment, his intelligence, his careful vetting of partners. But the panic attack 2 hours ago had stripped away his defenses. He couldn't trust his own instincts anymore. Couldn't trust his team. Couldn't trust anyone, except possibly the homeless man sitting in his passenger seat, who had every reason to want revenge but was offering help instead. Why tell me this? Steve asked. If Marcus destroyed you, if he's getting away with it, why not just let him do it to me too? Why not watch me burn? David was quiet for a moment. Outside the SUV, the parking garage hummed with ventilation systems and distant traffic. Because that makes me him, David said finally. Because the thing that broke me wasn't losing everything. It was realizing that the person I trusted most, the person I shared DNA with, could look at me and see nothing but opportunity, could watch me fall and feel nothing but satisfaction. His voice hardened. I won't be that. Even to someone I don't know, even to someone who probably would have walked past me on the street without a second glance. The accusation stung because it was true. Steve had walked past hundreds of homeless people. Thousands. Maybe. Never wondered about their stories. Never considered that they might have had brothers who betrayed them, companies that discarded them, lives that mattered. So what do I do? Steve heard the exhaustion in his own voice. If Marcus is setting me up, if the deal is poisoned, if my own company is compromised, what do I do? First, you stop acting alone. David shifted forward. Intensity building. That's your biggest vulnerability. Marcus has isolated you, made you paranoid of your own team, suspicious of your partners, convinced that you can't trust anyone. That's by design. Isolated people make bad decisions. Who can I trust? Your CFO. Sarah Nakamura. She's tried to warn you 4 times in the last month. You shut her down each time because Marcus was in the room, subtly undermining her, making her look paranoid. David paused. She's not paranoid. She's right. And she's loyal. Actually loyal. Not strategically loyal. Steve thought back to recent meetings. Sarah had raised concerns about Marcus's consultants, about decision-making timelines, about the speed at which they were moving. Each time Marcus had smoothly redirected, reframed, made Sarah's caution seem like fear of success. And Steve had believed him. Second, David continued. You need to quarantine Marcus. Don't fire him, that'll tip him off, and he'll accelerate whatever his endgame is. But stop sharing real information. Feed him carefully curated updates. Make him think everything is going according to his plan while you work the actual problem. That's impossible. He's got people embedded, so embed your own people. People he doesn't know about. Independent auditors, yes, but also private investigators. Find out exactly what he's done, who he's talked to, what he's planning. Build a case while he thinks he's winning. Steve felt something shift in his chest. Not panic this time. Something sharper, clearer. The fog of exhaustion was lifting, replaced by the cold focus that had built his empire in the first place. Third, David said, voice dropping. You use the supply chain audit the way I suggested, but you do it smart. You announce it publicly, make yourself look like a reformer, but you also use it as cover to investigate your own company. Find out who's loyal, who's compromised, who's on Marcus's payroll. The audit isn't just about supply chains. It's about rooting out the infection. Steve stopped. That's actually brilliant. It's what I would have done if I'd understood what was happening before it was too late. They sat in silence. The parking garage felt less empty now, less like a tomb, and more like a war room. Steve's mind was racing again, but differently. Not in circles, in lines, strategies, counter moves. I need your help, Steve said abruptly. Not just tonight. For this whole thing, I need someone who understands Marcus, who can think like him, who can see the traps before I walk into them. David shook his head slowly. Steve, I'll pay you. Whatever you want. Name a price. It's not about money. Then what? Steve turned in his seat, facing David fully. What do you want? Because you're right. Everyone wants something. Even you. Even people who say they don't. So what is it? David looked down at his hands. They were weathered, calloused. The hands of someone who'd worked hard and lost everything anyway. I want my brother to know I'm not invisible, he said quietly. I want him to see me succeed. Especially if it means stopping him. The honesty was devastating. Steve had expected demands for money, housing, restoration. Instead, David wanted something simpler and infinitely more complicated. To matter to someone who'd decided he didn't. Done, Steve said, but not as revenge, as justice. We expose what he's done to you, to me, to whoever else. We do it right. Legal. Documented. No shortcuts. Why? Because you're right about one thing. I've spent 20 years becoming the kind of person who would walk past you on a street. The kind of person who sees people as resources or obstacles. The kind of person Marcus thinks I am. Steve's voice hardened with something like conviction. Maybe it's time to become someone different. David studied him, searching for sincerity, for signs of manipulation. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Okay, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we do this clean. No illegal surveillance. No hacking. Nothing that compromises the case if it goes to court. Everything has to be defensible. Agreed. Second, when this is over, when Marcus is exposed and the company is secure, you don't just write me a check and forget I exist. You use your resources to help people like me. The ones who fell through cracks they didn't know existed. Not charity. Actual systemic change. Steve felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Guilt, maybe. Or recognition of how much he'd ignored while building his empire. Agreed, he said. What else? That's it. Help me stop my brother. Then help me make sure what happened to me happens to fewer people. Steve extended his hand. David looked at it clean, manicured, belonging to a different world, then reached out and shook it. His grip was firm despite everything. "We start tomorrow," Steve said. "Early. I'll have my assistant book you a hotel." "No." "No? I go back to my corner tonight. If Marcus has people watching you, they need to see your normal routine. You went for a drive. You came back. Nothing changed. We don't tip him off before we're ready." Steve wanted to argue. The idea of David returning to the street after this conversation felt obscene. But the logic was sound. "Tomorrow, then. 7 a.m. There's a diner 2 blocks from where your corner is. Martin's. I'll meet you there." "I'll be there." They sat for another moment, the weight of what they'd agreed to settling over them. Then David opened the passenger door. "Steve?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for listening. Most people don't." Then he was gone, disappearing into the concrete shadows of the parking garage, returning to a life Steve couldn't imagine and didn't want to. Steve sat alone in his SUV, hands shaking slightly. Mind clearer than it had been in months. He had a plan. He had an ally. He had a chance. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. Steve didn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a city that never stopped moving and went through everything. Every contract, every email, every decision he'd made in the last 6 months since Marcus Chen had entered his orbit. The patterns were there, obvious now, invisible before. Marcus's consultants on the operations team. Marcus's recommendations for legal counsel. Marcus's suggestions about which partners to pursue, which deals to prioritize. Every piece of advice had seemed brilliant at the time, strategic, forward-thinking, exactly what Steve needed to hear. Now they looked like chess moves. Positioning pieces, controlling the board. At 4 a.m., Steve's phone buzzed. "Marcus Chen. Can't sleep either? We should talk strategy." "Breakfast at Celsius?" Steve stared at the message. Celsius was Marcus's favorite restaurant. Expensive. Private booths. The kind of place where deals got made and secrets got traded. The kind of place where Marcus would probe, assess, figure out if Steve was breaking. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed to confront Marcus immediately. To accuse. To rage. To burn it all down with righteous fury. But David's voice echoed in his head. "Don't tip him off before we're ready." Steve typed back. "Good idea. 8:30? Perfect. We'll fix this together." The word "together" felt like a knife between his ribs. At 6:45 a.m., Steve walked into Martin's diner. It was the kind of place he never would have noticed before, worn booths. Coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs. A laminated menu that hadn't changed since 1987. The air smelled like bacon grease and yesterday's coffee. A handful of early risers sat scattered throughout. Construction workers. Night shift nurses. People whose lives operated on different schedules than billionaires. David sat in a corner booth, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He'd cleaned up somehow, beard trimmed, face washed, wearing the same clothes but looking more purposeful, less invisible. Steve slid into the booth across from him. A waitress appeared instantly. Poured coffee without asking. Disappeared. "You look terrible," David said. "Didn't sleep. Went through everything." Steve pulled out his tablet, lowered his voice. "You were right. About all of it. Marcus has been positioning for months. Every recommendation, every introduction, it all serves him. Did you respond to his messages?" He texted at 4 a.m. Wants breakfast at 8:30. David's expression darkened. "He's accelerating. That's earlier than I expected. What does it mean?" "Means he knows something shifted. Maybe someone saw us last night. Maybe he's just sensing you're close to breaking. Either way, he's moving up his timeline. David leaned forward. What did you tell him? That I'd meet him. Good. You need to go. Act normal. Desperate. But not suspicious. Let him think he's winning. Steve's jaw clenched. I don't know if I can sit across from him and pretend. You have to. David's voice was hard. Because if you confront him now, without evidence, without protection, he'll destroy you. He's better at this than you are. He's had more practice. The words stung because they were true. Steve had built an empire through vision and execution. Marcus had built his through manipulation and betrayal. Different skill sets. And right now, Marcus's were more useful. What do I say to him? Tell him you're panicking. Tell him you're ready to give him whatever he wants. Make him greedy. Greedy people make mistakes. David pulled out a folded piece of paper. Notebook paper. The kind from a drugstore. Covered in tight handwriting. I wrote down everything I remember. Every tactic he used on me. Every tell when he's lying. Every weakness. Steve took the paper, unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural. Lists and observations and psychological assessments that would have cost $50,000 from a corporate consultant. Steve looked up. This is incredibly detailed. I've had 2 years to think about nothing else. David's voice was flat. 2 years on a curb, replaying every conversation, every decision, every moment I should have seen it coming. That's what you get for free time clarity about how you got destroyed. Steve read through the notes. They were devastating. Marcus's patterns, his tells, the way he isolated targets from their support systems, the way he manufactured urgency, the way he made people feel like he was their only option. He's going to offer you a solution today, David said, at breakfast. Some brilliant fix to the Aurora problem. It'll sound perfect. It'll solve everything. And it'll give him exactly what he needs. Probably more equity. Probably board seats. Probably decision-making authority disguised as streamlining or efficiency. You'll want to say yes because you're tired and scared. And it'll feel like relief. But I say no. You say maybe. You say, let me think about it. You say anything except yes or no. You buy time. Steve nodded slowly, absorbing the strategy. It felt wrong, playing games when he wanted to flip tables. But David was right. Emotion was a luxury. Strategy was survival. While you're at breakfast, David continued, I need you to do something for me. What? Your CFO, Sarah Nakamura. Call her. Tell her to meet me here at 10 a.m. Don't tell her why. Don't tell her anything about me. Just tell her it's urgent and confidential. Steve hesitated. She'll think it's strange. Good. Strange makes people pay attention. I need her attention. Why, Sarah? Because she's already suspicious of Marcus. Because she's competent and loyal. Because she has access to financial records that Marcus thinks he's hidden. And because... David paused, something painful crossing his face. Because she used to work with me. 10 years ago. Before everything. She'll remember. Steve felt pieces clicking into place. She knows who you are. She knows who I was. She has no idea what happened to me. When I disappeared, I just disappeared. Let everyone think I'd moved away. Started over somewhere else. Easier than explaining how completely I'd failed. You didn't fail. You were sabotaged. Feels the same from the inside. David's voice was quiet. But maybe if Sarah sees me, sees what Marcus did, maybe that's the evidence you need. Someone credible who knew both of us before. It was smart. Devastating and smart. Sarah's testimony, combined with documents, combined with Marcus's patterns, it could build a case. Okay, Steve said. I'll call her after breakfast. One more thing. David's expression hardened. When Marcus makes his offer, when he shows you his solution, record it. Voice memo on your phone. Make it look casual, like you're taking notes, but get it on record. Is that legal? Depends on the state. In this state, one party consent. As long as you're part of the conversation, you can record it. And we'll need it. Because whatever he offers you today, it'll be the beginning of his end game. And we need proof of intent. Steve felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was real. Not business games. Not strategic positioning. Real betrayal. Real danger. Real consequences. I'm scared, Steve admitted. The word surprised him. Good, David said. Fear means you understand what's at stake. Just don't let it paralyze you. Let it sharpen you. They sat in silence for a moment. The diner hummed around them, dishes clattering, conversations blending. Life happening at ground level where Steve rarely noticed. After this is over, Steve said quietly, after we stop Marcus, you're not going back to that corner. We'll see. I'm serious. Whatever happens, whatever you need, Steve. David's voice was firm. Don't make promises about the future when you're emotional about the present. Beat Marcus first. Save your company. Survive. Then we'll talk about what comes next. It was the kind of practical wisdom Steve had forgotten existed. The kind that came from losing everything and learning to live without guarantees. Thank you, Steve said. For this. For last night. For, don't thank me yet. David stood, dropped a few crumpled bills on the table for the coffee. Thank me when it's over. If we win. When we win. David smiled, small, sad, uncertain. When we win. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Steve, whatever Marcus offers you today, whatever it is, remember that it's poisoned. No matter how good it sounds, no matter how much you want to believe him, it's poisoned. The only question is whether you're desperate enough to drink it anyway. Then he was gone, leaving Steve alone with cold coffee and a notebook full of warnings written by someone who'd learned them the hard way. Steve checked his watch. 7:30 a.m., 1 hour until breakfast with Marcus Chen. 1 hour to prepare for a performance that could save or destroy everything. He pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and started practicing looking casual while recording. Outside, the city woke up to another day. Somewhere, Marcus Chen was preparing his offer. Somewhere, David Chen was waiting to see if his brother's next victim would be smarter than he'd been. And somewhere in the space between those two brothers, Steve was about to discover what kind of man he actually was when everything was on the line. Celsius Restaurant was exactly as Steve remembered: polished marble, soft lighting, tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. The kind of place where power was currency and everyone knew the exchange rate. Marcus Chen sat at their usual booth, looking immaculate in a tailored navy suit. He stood as Steve approached, smile warm, hand extended. You look exhausted, Marcus said with what seemed like genuine concern. Rough night? Steve shook his hand, feeling the grip firm. Confident. the handshake of someone who knew he was winning. Couldn't stop thinking about Aurora, about how close we are to losing everything. Sit. Marcus gestured to the booth. I think I found a solution. Too eager, Steve thought. David had been right. Marcus was accelerating. Steve slid into the booth, positioned his phone casually on the table near his water glass, tapped the voice memo app as he picked up the menu. Tell me, Steve said, injecting his voice with desperate hope. Tell me you've figured something out. Marcus leaned forward, eyes bright with what looked like excitement. I've been working back channels all night, calling in favors, and I think I'm almost certain I can get the regulatory concerns resolved. Clean. Fast. How? I have relationships with 3 key people in the regulatory office. People who owe me. People who understand that this merger actually increases competition rather than limiting it. We just need to present it right. Marcus's voice was smooth, practiced, but it requires complete coordination. We can't have mixed messages. We can't have your team contradicting our strategy. Steve's stomach tightened. Here it comes. What are you suggesting? Temporary consolidation of decision-making authority. Just until we get through this crisis, you make me acting coup not permanently, just for the next 60 days, and I handle all communications with regulators. All negotiations with Aurora. All internal coordination. Marcus spread his hands. You focus on the vision, the big picture. I handle the execution. Like a wartime general. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like exactly what Steve needed. Someone competent taking charge while he was drowning. It was poison. That's a lot of authority, Steve said carefully. It's a lot of risk, Marcus countered. If this fails, it's on me. My reputation. My relationships. I'm putting everything on the line to save this deal. He paused, then added with perfect timing, to save you. The manipulation was surgical, making himself the hero, making Steve the one being rescued, creating debt before Steve even agreed to anything. What about the board? Steve asked. They'd need to approve this. Emergency powers clause. You can invoke it without board approval in crisis situations. It's in the bylaws, I checked. Marcus slid a folder across the table. I had legal draw up the paperwork. Simple authorization. Sign it, and I can start making calls this afternoon. By Monday, we'll have regulatory approval. By next Friday, Aurora is back at the table. Steve looked at the folder without opening it. This gives you signing authority. Budget approval? Temporary. Limited to Aurora. Related decisions. Marcus's tone was reassuring. Steve, I know this feels like a lot, but you hired me because I'm good at this. Because I see solutions where others see problems. Let me do what I do best. What do you get out of this? Steve asked. Be honest. What's in it for you? Marcus smiled, genuine seeming, almost humble. When this works, when Aurora closes, I want you to remember that I was here when everyone else ran. I want that to matter when we talk about long-term partnership, about equity, about building something bigger together. There it was, the real ask wrapped in loyalty language. Marcus wasn't demanding equity now, that would be too obvious. He was investing an obligation, creating a debt Steve would feel compelled to repay later, when emotions were high and gratitude was fresh. Exactly what David had predicted. Can I think about it? Steve asked. This is a lot to process. Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to name, gone before Steve could analyze it. Frustration? Concern? Calculation? Of course, Marcus said smoothly. But Steve and I say this as a friend. We don't have much time. Every hour you wait is an hour. Aurora gets more nervous. Regulators get more aggressive. And your competitors smell blood. I need to start making calls today. This afternoon. Or the opportunity closes. Manufactured urgency. Another tactic from David's list. Give me until this evening, Steve said. Let me talk to Sarah. Get her take on the financial implications. Sarah's cautious by nature, Marcus said, a hint of edge creeping into his voice. She'll find reasons to say no. She always does. But Sarah isn't the one with regulatory relationships. She isn't the one who can save this deal. Translation: don't trust Sarah. Only trust me. Steve picked up his water glass, buying time. His phone sat innocently near his napkin, recording everything. He needed more. Needed Marcus to reveal more. What if it doesn't work? Steve asked. What if you take this authority and the deal still falls apart? Then I resign, Marcus said without hesitation. Publicly. I take full responsibility. Your reputation stays intact. He leaned back, supremely confident. But it will work. I've never failed at something like this. Never, never. Steve thought about David, about a brother betrayed, a company stolen, a life destroyed. Marcus had succeeded at that. Perfectly. Completely. Tell me about your family, Steve said suddenly. Marcus's expression froze for a microsecond. My family? You never talk about them. Parents, siblings, anyone. It's like you materialized, fully formed. Steve kept his voice casual, curious. I realized last night I've known you for months, and I don't know anything about where you came from. I prefer to focus on the future, not the past. Marcus's tone had cooled slightly. What does this have to do with Aurora? Nothing. Just curious. You're asking me to trust you with my company. Seems fair to know more about who you are. The silence stretched. Marcus's jaw worked slightly, a tell Steve had never noticed before. David had written about it. When he's deciding whether to lie or deflect, his jaw tightens. Left side more than right. I had a brother, Marcus said finally. Long time ago. We were in business together. It didn't work out. What happened? He couldn't handle success. Made bad decisions. Became unstable. Marcus's voice was flat. Practiced. Eventually, I had to cut ties. For the good of the company. Do you still talk to him? No. Haven't spoken in years. Don't know where he is. Marcus shifted forward, forcing the conversation back on track. Steve, I understand you're nervous. This is a big decision. But we're running out of time. I need an answer today. Steve looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the calculation behind the concern. The manipulation behind the friendship. The predator behind the partner. I'll call you by 6, Steve said. Make it 4. I need daylight hours to work with. More pressure. More urgency. More control. 4. Steve agreed. They finished breakfast making small talk market conditions, competitor movements, safe topics that meant nothing. When the check came, Marcus insisted on paying. Another investment in obligation. Outside the restaurant, Marcus gripped Steve's shoulder. We're going to win this. Trust me. Steve watched him walk away, confident stride. Phone already out. A man who believed he was hours away from everything he'd engineered. Steve waited until Marcus turned the corner. Then he stopped the recording, pulled out his phone, and called Sarah Nakamura. Sarah, I need you to do something unusual. Don't ask questions yet. Just trust me. What's going on? Martin's Diner, 10 a.m. There's someone you need to meet. Who? Steve hesitated, then said simply, someone from your past. Someone who needs your help, and someone who might save both of us. He hung up before she could ask more questions. 9:45 a.m. 15 minutes until Sarah met David. 4 hours until Steve had to give Marcus an answer. The war had begun, and for the first time since last night, Steve felt like he might actually survive it. At 10:02 a.m., Sarah Nakamura walked into Martin's Diner, looking annoyed and confused. She was 42, sharp-eyed, dressed in business casual because Steve's cryptic call had caught her on a Saturday morning. She scanned the diner, looking for Steve. Instead, her eyes landed on the man in the corner booth. The color drained from her face. David? The word came out as a whisper. David stood slowly. Hey, Sarah. She crossed the diner in 4 strides. Stopped 3 feet from the booth, like she'd hit an invisible wall. They said you moved to Seattle. Started over. Everyone said. Her voice broke. What happened to you? Marcus happened. David gestured to the booth. Sit. Please. There's a lot to explain. Sarah sat mechanically, eyes never leaving David's face. Steve could see her mind racing, calculating, trying to reconcile the person she remembered with the person in front of her. I need to tell you everything, David said, and then I need your help stopping him before he does to Steve what he did to me. Sarah's expression hardened. Tell me, and David began to talk. By the time he finished, 20 minutes later, Sarah's hands were shaking with rage. He forged documents, she said, voice tight. He fabricated mental illness. He destroyed you. And then she stopped, fury choking off words. And now he's doing it to Steve. Yes. Do you have proof? Evidence? Anything? I have patterns. I have testimony. I have Steve's recording from this morning. David looked at her directly. And I have you. Someone who knew both of us before. Someone credible. Someone Marcus can't dismiss. Sarah pulled out her phone. I have access to financial records. Marcus's consulting firm has been billing Steve's company for 18 months. If I really dig, I can find connections, money trails, evidence of coordination. Be careful, David warned. Marcus has people watching. If he knows you're investigating, let him know. Sarah's voice was cold steel. I'm CFO. Financial due diligence is my job. If Marcus objects to me doing my job, that's suspicious in itself. She stood, energy crackling off her. I need 6 hours. Maybe 8. I'll pull every transaction, every authorization, every recommendation Marcus has made. I'll build a case that even his lawyers can't talk around. She looked at David. You're coming with me. You'll tell me everything you remember about how he operates. Every shell company, every tactic, every move. Sarah, I'm not asking. Her voice softened slightly. You disappeared on us, David. We thought you'd abandoned everything. Do you know how many people would have helped you if we'd known? I was ashamed. Well, stop. She grabbed her coat. Shame is what people like Marcus count on. It's why we stay quiet, why we don't ask for help, why we let them win. Her eyes blazed. Not this time. David stood, something like hope flickering across his face for the first time. Steve's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Thinking 4 o'clock might be too late. Can you decide by 2? The timeline was compressing. Marcus was getting nervous. Good. Steve typed back. 2 works. We'll call you then. He looked at Sarah and David. We have 4 hours to build a case that destroys him. Can we do it? Sarah smiled sharp. Dangerous. Determined. Watch us. At 1:47 p.m., Steve sat in his home office surrounded by evidence. Sarah had worked with the intensity of someone possessed. Spreadsheets covered his desk. Transaction records highlighted in yellow. Email chains printed and annotated. A timeline of Marcus's involvement mapped across 3 sheets of poster board like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except it was all real, documented, provable. David sat across from him, adding context to each discovery. That's the shell company he used for our old business. Same structure, same registered agent. He's not even trying to hide it. He doesn't think anyone is looking. Sarah paced, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I need forensic accounting. Today. I don't care what it costs. No, I'll authorize it personally. Steve Carlson's company, Aurora Systems merger. Thank you. She hung up. They'll have preliminary results in 3 hours. Full analysis by Monday morning. Steve's phone buzzed. Marcus, it's 1:47. Need your answer. In 13 minutes. He's sweating, David observed. He wouldn't be pushing this hard if he wasn't nervous. Good. Steve looked at the evidence spread before him. It was damning. Marcus's consulting firm had overbilled by millions. His independent recommendations had systematically positioned his own people in key roles. The supply chain vendor he'd recommended, the one with conflict zone connections, was owned by a subsidiary of a subsidiary that traced back to Marcus. He'd created the problem, then positioned himself as the solution. We could go public with this, Sarah said. Call the board. Emergency meeting. Show them everything. No, David said firmly. Not yet. We need more. More? Sarah gestured at the evidence. This is enough to destroy him. It's enough to wound him. Not enough to finish him. David's voice was hard. Marcus is smart. He'll have explanations. Plausible deniability. His lawyers will drag it out for years. And during that time, he'll be destroying evidence, bribing witnesses, turning people against you. He looked at Steve. You need him to confess. On record, in his own words, the breakfast recording isn't enough. He never explicitly says he created the crisis. He offers a solution. But solutions aren't crimes. We need him to admit intent, premeditation, the whole thing. Steve checked his watch. 1:51 p.m. 9 minutes. How do I get him to confess? David leaned forward. You give him what he wants. You sign his authorization. You let him think he's won. Then you watch him gloat, because he will gloat. Narcissists always do. They can't help themselves. And when he's feeling safe, feeling victorious, you ask him how he pulled it off. Frame it as admiration. Make him want to impress you with his brilliance. That's incredibly risky, Sarah said. It's the only way. David's expression was haunted. I know. Because I had the same chance once. Marcus came to me the day after he stole everything, and he couldn't help himself. He started explaining how clever he'd been, how he'd outmaneuvered me. I was too destroyed to document it, too broken to see it as evidence. But you're not broken. You're ready. And this time, we'll catch every word. Steve's phone buzzed again. Marcus, 2 minutes. Yes or no? Steve looked at Sarah. If this goes wrong, it won't. She was already pulling out equipment. I've got a recording device that's actually designed for this. Professional grade. Legal. Admissible in court. She handed Steve what looked like a pen. Works up to 30 feet. Voice activated. Just keep it in your pocket. 1 minute, David said, watching the clock. Steve took the pen, felt its weight. Everything came down to this. Trust David's instinct. Trust Sarah's evidence. Trust that Marcus's ego would be his undoing. Trust strangers he'd met 24 hours ago over a partner he'd worked with for months. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 1:59 p.m., Steve called Marcus. I'm in, Steve said. You were right. We need decisive action. I'm signing the authorization. The relief in Marcus's voice was palpable. You won't regret this. I promise you. I want to do it in person. At my office. Can you come now? A pause. Brief. Calculating. Of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Steve hung up, looked at David and Sarah. He's coming. Marcus arrived at 2:23 p.m., slightly breathless, carrying a leather portfolio. Steve's assistant, one of the few people Sarah confirmed wasn't on Marcus's payroll, showed him into the office, then quietly closed the door. Steve sat behind his desk, the authorization papers visible. Marcus's eyes locked onto them immediately. You've made the right choice, Marcus said, sitting across from Steve. I know that wasn't easy. I trust you. Steve kept his voice even. You've been right about everything. I should have listened to you weeks ago. Marcus relaxed visibly. Well, we're here now. That's what matters. He pulled out a pen his own. Expensive. Probably monogrammed. Shall we? Steve reached for the document, then paused. Before I sign, I need to know something. What? How did you know? Steve leaned forward, injecting his voice with admiration. About Aurora. About the regulatory concerns. About all of it. You saw problems coming that I completely missed. How? Marcus smiled, genuine, pleased. Experience. Pattern. Recognition. I've done deals like this before, but specifically, the supply chain issue. The regulatory angle. You knew exactly where to look. Lucky instinct, I suppose. Come on. Steve laughed, making it conspiratorial. It's just us. You can tell me. How did you really know? In his pocket, the recording pen hummed silently. Marcus hesitated, ego warring with caution. Ego 1. I may have encouraged certain people to look more closely at your operations, Marcus said carefully. Nothing illegal. Just strategic information sharing. Making sure the right questions got asked at the right time. You tipped off Aurora Systems. I made sure they did thorough due diligence, which they should have been doing anyway. Marcus's voice took on a defensive edge. If your supply chain was clean, it wouldn't have been a problem. But it wasn't clean because I recommended vendors that I knew would eventually create concerns. Yes. Marcus said it like he was describing a brilliant chess move. Steve, you have to understand, creating controlled problems is how you demonstrate value. Nobody appreciates a doctor until they're sick. Nobody values a fixer until something needs fixing. Steve felt ice in his veins. You created the crisis. Deliberately, I created an opportunity. For both of us, you get a merger that works. I get a position that reflects my actual value. Everyone wins, except the partners who left. The employees who've been terrified. The collateral damage. Marcus waved dismissively. They'll be fine. In business, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. You know this, Steve. You've done similar things yourself. That's why we work well together. We understand that success requires ruthlessness. Steve kept his expression neutral while his stomach churned. What about your brother? Marcus's face went still. What? You said you had a brother. Business partner. Things didn't work out. I don't see how that's relevant. Did you use the same strategy with him? Create problems, then offer solutions? Marcus's eyes narrowed. That was different. He was weak. Couldn't handle the pressure. I did what I had to do to save the company. By stealing it from him. By taking what I'd earned. Marcus stood, energy shifting. Why are we talking about this? You said you were ready to sign. I am. Steve picked up the pen. Marcus's pen, not the recording device. I just wanted to understand how brilliant you really are. Creating the Aurora crisis. Positioning yourself as the only solution. Getting me to give you control. It's masterful. Marcus studied him, suspicion flickering. You're recording this conversation. Steve's heart stopped. What? You are. I can see it in your face. The way you're asking questions. The way you're getting me to say things. Marcus's voice went cold. Where is it? Your phone? Marcus, where is it? The door burst open. Sarah stepped in, tablet in hand. It doesn't matter. We have everything else. Marcus spun. Sarah, I should have known. Always so concerned with ethics and oversight and evidence. She set the tablet on Steve's desk, turned it toward Marcus. 18 months of overbilling. Shell companies. Fabricated consulting reports. And my personal favorite emails between you and Aurora Systems from 3 months ago, discussing strategic concerns about Steve's supply chain. Sent from your personal account. Encrypted. But not well enough. The color drained from Marcus's face. We also have testimony. Sarah continued. From someone who knows your playbook intimately. Someone you destroyed the same way you tried to destroy Steve. David stepped through the doorway. Marcus froze. You, me, David confirmed. For a long moment, the brothers stared at each other across Steve's office. Years of history, of betrayal, of silence, all compressed into that single moment. You're homeless, Marcus said, voice hollow. You're nobody. Who would believe you? I would, Sarah said. So would I, Steve added. And so would the forensic accountants who are currently pulling apart every transaction you've ever made through my company, Sarah said. And the board members I'm meeting with tomorrow. And the federal regulators who are very interested in conspiracy to commit fraud. Marcus's face twisted rage, fear, trapped animal desperation. You can't prove intent. My lawyers will hear the recording of you confessing to creating the Aurora crisis, Steve said quietly. That's what you asked about. The recording. It's not on my phone, Marcus. It's in my pocket. Voice activated, running the entire time. He pulled out the pen, set it on his desk. Marcus stared at it, then at David, then at Steve. "This is revenge," Marcus said to David. "You couldn't succeed, so you're trying to destroy me." "I'm trying to stop you," David interrupted, "from doing to others what you did to me. That's not revenge. That's justice." "You could have had everything," Marcus's voice cracked. "We built that company together. But you were too proud, too stubborn, too trusting," David finished. "I trusted you. That was my mistake." Steve almost made the same one. Marcus looked at Steve, desperate now. "We can still do this. Partner. Really partner. I made mistakes, yes, but get out." Steve's voice was flat. "Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Your access to all systems has been revoked. Your consulting contracts are terminated. And if you contact me, my company, or anyone associated with me, I will prosecute you with everything I have." "You need me," Marcus shouted. "Without me, Aurora falls apart. The regulatory issues were caused by you and will be solved without you." Steve stood. "I'd rather fail honestly than succeed through you." Marcus looked between them. Steve, Sarah, David. His empire crumbling in real time. No more moves. No more manipulations. Just exposure and consequences. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "No," Steve said. "I already regret trusting you. Everything after this is just correction." Security appeared at the door. Marcus straightened his jacket, grabbed his portfolio, walked out with his head high, still playing the part, still performing, even in defeat. When he was gone, silence filled the office. Sarah exhaled shakily. "That was necessary." David finished. "And not over. He'll lawyer up, fight back, try to salvage something." "Let him try," Steve said. "We have evidence. We have testimony. We have him on recording confessing to conspiracy." He looked at David. "We have you." David nodded slowly. Exhaustion suddenly visible in every line of his body. He'd been running on purpose for 24 hours. Now that the confrontation was over, the adrenaline was draining, leaving only the reality of 2 years on the street, of everything he'd lost, of the brother who'd chosen ambition over blood. "I need to sit down," David said quietly. Sarah was already pulling a chair over. "Sit. I'll get water. And then we're getting you a hotel room, a meal, and whatever else you need." "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Steve said firmly. "You just saved my company. My life, probably. You're the furthest thing from fine. So you're going to let us help you. Starting now." David looked up at him, eyes bright with something that might have been tears, or might have been relief, or might have been the first crack in 2 years of emotional armor. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." 3 months later, Steve stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city move below. Different now, not because the buildings had changed or the traffic patterns had shifted, but because he saw it differently. Saw the people on the sidewalks as individuals, with stories instead of obstacles to navigate around. Saw the homeless man on the corner 3 blocks down, not David, someone else, and wondered what had broken in his life to put him there. Behind him, Sarah reviewed quarterly reports. Aurora Systems merger closed yesterday. Final numbers are better than projected, even with the ethics audit delays. What's the total cost? Steve asked. The supply chain overhaul, the independent oversight, all of it, $47 million. Give or take. Steve nodded. Worth it. Every penny. The new supply chain was clean, transparent, defensible. His company's reputation had taken a hit initially, headlines about Billionaire's crisis of conscience and tech giant's surprise ethics crusade. But the long-term response had been surprisingly positive. Turns out people appreciated companies that fixed problems before regulators forced them to. Marcus? Steve asked. His lawyers are still fighting. But the evidence is overwhelming. Federal prosecutors picked up the case last week. They're talking about multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and something about securities violations I don't fully understand yet. Sarah's voice was satisfied. He'll be lucky to avoid prison time. Steve felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. Just a hollow awareness that Marcus had destroyed himself through his own choices, over and over, until the consequences finally caught up. And David? Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Steve had seen from her in months. You should see for yourself. The building was in a neighborhood Steve had never visited before. Not dangerous, not wealthy, just existing. Working class, real. The kind of place where people lived actual lives instead of curated ones. David's apartment was on the 3rd floor. Steve climbed stairs that smelled like cooking and laundry and humanity. Knocked on door 3C. David answered wearing jeans and a button-down shirt. Both knew. His beard was properly trimmed now. His eyes were clearer. He looked like someone who slept in a bed instead of a doorway, who ate meals instead of scraps, who existed instead of just survived. Hey, David said. Come in. The apartment was small but clean. Furnished simply IKEA, probably. But it was furniture that belonged to him. A desk sat by the window, covered in papers, blueprints. A laptop displaying complex diagrams. You're working, Steve observed. Consulting, small projects. Companies with logistics problems they can't solve. David gestured to the desk. Turns out 2 years of invisible observation taught me things about supply chain inefficiencies that most consultants never learn. I see problems they miss. You could work for me. I've offered, I know, and I appreciate it. But I need to do this myself. Build something that's mine, that I earned, that nobody can take away because it exists in my skill, not on paper. David's voice was firm, but not angry. Does that make sense? It did. Completely. Steve moved to the window, looked out at the street. I've been thinking about what you said. About systemic change. About making sure what happened to you happens to fewer people. And I've been working with the city on a pilot program. Job training for homeless individuals with professional backgrounds, not charity actual employment pathways. Using my connections to place people in companies that need talent but have stopped looking in unconventional places. Steve turned to face David. I want you to help design it. David was quiet for a moment. Why me? Because you understand both sides. The corporate world that discarded you. The street that caught you. The gap between competence and opportunity. Steve's voice intensified. Because programs designed by people who've never been homeless always miss something. They're too clean, too theoretical. They don't account for the reality of what it takes to climb back up when the system has already decided. You don't matter. That's a lot of responsibility. You've been handling responsibility for 2 years with no resources, no support, and no recognition. This just means you'll finally get paid for it." David smiled, small, uncertain, hopeful. "Okay. But I have conditions." "Of course you do. The program can't just be about employment. It has to address the reasons people fall through cracks in the first place. Mental health support, legal advocacy, housing assistance, because getting a job doesn't fix everything. If you're still dealing with trauma, debt, and instability." "Agreed. What else?" "You have to hire people who've been homeless to run it. Not as tokens. As actual leaders. People who know what they're talking about because they've lived it." "Done." "And," David hesitated, "you have to be okay with failure. With some people not making it. With programs that don't work perfectly. Because we're going to try things, and some of them will fail. And if you pull funding the first time something doesn't work, then this is just another feel-good initiative that dies quietly." Steve nodded slowly. "I can live with that. As long as we learn from the failures. Then I'm in." They shook hands, firm, equal, the grip of partners rather than savior. And saved. "There's something else," Steve said. "Marcus's trial starts in 6 weeks. They're calling witnesses. Character testimony. They'll probably ask you to testify about what he did to you." David's expression closed slightly. "I know. You don't have to. If it's too painful. If you're not ready, I'm ready." David's voice was steel. "I've been ready for 2 years. I just needed someone to ask. It'll be public. Your story. Everything that happened. People will know." "Good." David moved to his desk, picked up a framed photograph Steve hadn't noticed before. 2 men, younger, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Brothers. Before everything. Let them know. Let everyone know what unchecked ambition costs. Not just the person who has it, the people around them. The people who trust them. Steve looked at the photograph, at the ghost of relationship that had existed before betrayal destroyed it. "Do you miss him? The brother he used to be?" "Every day." David's voice cracked slightly. "But the brother I miss doesn't exist anymore. Maybe never did. Maybe I just wanted to believe in him so badly that I ignored who he actually was." He set the photo down. "That's the real lesson, I think. Not that people betray you, but that sometimes the person you trust most is the person you should have been most careful with." The words settled heavy in the room. "I'm sorry," Steve said. "For all of it. For walking past you. For almost becoming another person Marcus destroyed. For being part of a system that makes it so easy to discard people. Don't apologize. Change it." David's eyes were fierce now. "You've got resources, influence, platforms I'll never have. Use them. Make noise. Make other billionaires uncomfortable. Force conversations about why someone can lose everything and nobody notices until it's too late. I'm trying. Try harder." David's voice softened. "Because you're one of the rare ones who actually listened. Who actually saw me as a person instead of a problem. Most people in your position never do that. They never have to. So the fact that you did, the fact that you're here right now, instead of letting your assistant write a check and forgetting I exist, that matters." Steve felt something shift in his chest. Not redemption exactly. He hadn't earned that. But maybe the beginning of understanding that wealth without awareness was just accumulation. That success without humanity was just mathematics. "What changed for you?" David asked suddenly. "That night, in your car. What actually broke?" Steve thought about it. The panic attack, the isolation, the realization that he'd built an empire and forgotten to build a life. I think I finally understood that being unreachable isn't the same as being invincible. That the higher I climbed, the further I had to fall. And that when you fall from that height, if you've spent your whole life making sure nobody can reach you, he paused, then nobody catches you. And now I'm trying to build different, not just wealth relationships, not just success meaning, not just power responsibility. Steve smiled tiredly. It's harder than building a company. Turns out, emotional intelligence doesn't scale the way business intelligence does. But you're trying. I'm trying. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the street below. A young woman pushed a stroller. An old man walked a dog. Normal life, happening everywhere, all the time, invisible to people who'd stopped looking. Thank you, Steve said finally, for that night. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For being brave enough to offer help when you had every reason not to. Thank you for listening, David replied. For being scared enough to hear truth, instead of comfortable enough to ignore it. Steve's phone buzzed. Sarah, reminding him about a meeting in an hour. The world kept moving, demanding attention, pulling him back into the machinery of business and obligation. But different now. Everything was different now. I should go, Steve said. But I'll send you the program details tonight. We can start planning next week. I'll be ready. At the door. Steve paused. David, what you said before about fear, meaning I understood what was at stake. You were right. I'm still scared. Every day. That I'll slide back into old patterns. That I'll forget this feeling. That I'll become the person who would have walked past you again. Good, David said. Stay scared. Fear means you're still paying attention. The moment you stop being scared is the moment you stop being careful. And careful is what keeps you human. Steve nodded, understanding settling into his bones. He left the apartment, walked down 3 flights of stairs, emerged onto a street that looked exactly the same as it had when he'd entered but felt entirely different. Or maybe he was different. Maybe that's what salvation looked like, not the world changing, but your eyes finally opening to what had been there all along. His car was parked 2 blocks away. As Steve walked, he noticed the homeless man he'd seen from his office window earlier. Older, weathered, holding a sign that said, Veteran, hungry, anything helps. 6 months ago, Steve would have walked past without seeing. 3 months ago, he would have seen but kept walking, guilt nagging quietly. Today, he stopped. What's your name? Steve asked. The man looked up, surprised. Robert, I'm Steve. Are you hungry right now? Yes, sir. There's a diner 2 blocks that way. Martin's. Tell them Steve Carlson sent you. Order whatever you want. It's covered. Robert's eyes filled. I don't thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just eat. Steve paused. And if you're looking for work, if you have skills, experience, anything, I'm starting a program. Employment for people who've been where you are. I can't promise anything, but I can promise we'll actually look at you as a person, not a problem. He handed Robert a business card with Sarah's direct line. Robert took it with shaking hands. Why are you doing this? Steve thought about David. About panic attacks in luxury cars. About the distance between invincibility and invisibility being smaller than anyone wanted to believe. Because someone did it for me, Steve said, when I needed it most. He walked away before Robert could respond, before emotion could crack through professional composure, before the weight of 2 years of walking past people could crush him. One person helped. One conversation. One meal. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was different than before. And different was how change started. Steve reached his car, climbed in, sat for a moment in leather and technology and comfort he'd once taken for granted, and now recognized as armor against reality. His phone showed 36 unread emails, board meeting notes, market analyses, the constant churn of business demanding attention. But underneath it all, one text from David, sent while Steve had been walking. Thank you for seeing me, then and now. It saved both of us. Steve read it 3 times, then pulled out of the parking space and drove toward his next meeting, toward his complicated life, toward a future that looked nothing like the past he'd been building. Different now. Everything was different now. And maybe, just maybe, different was exactly what the world needed.